Maybe not, but I do not forget kindness. They sat again, this time over coffee and leftover beans. Back at the cabin, the sun dipped low. She sat on the porch steps, shelling peas into a bowl. He joined her, boots dusty, a quiet settled in his chest he didn't know he'd been missing. Rowan didn't look at him when she spoke next. I want to build something here. Not just stay. He watched her hands work, steady and skilled. Then we'll build it together. And in that quiet, with the sky streaked orange and the scent of cut grass on the wind, they sat close, the kind of close that didn't need to be explained, nothing more needed saying. Everything that mattered already had been. By mid-October, the first frost came with no warning. Overnight, the grass along the fence turned stiff and silver, and the pump handle stung cold in Rowan's grip. She paused, breath fogging, and looked out toward the pasture. The cattle moved slow in the cold, dark shapes against the pale scrub, their coats thickening for winter. Inside, Wesley was fitting a new hinge to the barn door. The old one had cracked in the last wind. He straightened when she came in, shaking the frost from her skirt hem. "We'll need to bring the feed barrels up from the root cellar tomorrow," she said, rubbing her hands together. "The ground'll be too hard to dig through soon." He set the hammer down. "You're thinking ahead. Somebody ought to." He smiled, not wide, but enough to warm the air between them. That afternoon, they walked the length of the fence line with a coil of wire and a satchel of nails. Rowan held the posts steady while Wesley worked the hammer. Neither spoke until they reached the north line, where the land dipped and the wind came straight off the mountains. She leaned against the post while he wound the line. "My uncle wrote again," she said, watching the sky. He didn't pause in his work. "What'd he say?" "He heard I never showed. Thought maybe the letter got lost. Said I'm still welcome, but he understands if I've chosen differently." Wesley drove the nail deep, then looked at her. "You write him back." "I will," she said. "I owe him that. You sure he won't come looking?" "He's not that type." Wesley nodded and passed her a fresh steak. "If he does, I won't be hard to find." That night she sat by the stove, turning a single letter over in her lap. The ink had faded some, but the words still held weight. Wesley watched her from the workbench where he was oiling the rifle. "I keep thinking about what I'd say," she murmured. "But it all sounds different in my head than it does on the page." He set the cloth down. "Say it plain, that's what folks remember." She folded the letter once, twice, then tucked it into the drawer beside the butter churn. "I'll write him tomorrow." The next few days turned colder. Rowan stacked firewood in even rows beneath the eaves, and Wesley added a second latch to the henhouse. The days shortened, and the nights came early. They moved through the hours like two people who had never needed to speak often to be understood. One morning, Rowan found him in the shed fitting leather to the ox yoke. She leaned against the doorframe, watching the way his shoulders moved beneath his shirt. "You ever think about adding to the herd?" she asked. He looked up. "I have." She crossed her arms. "There's a man 2 miles west. Keeps a good line of Herefords, might be worth a visit." Wesley leaned back on his heels. "You been talking to neighbors?" She raised an eyebrow. "I talk, you just don't hear it." He laughed once, short and surprised. "Fair." They rode out that afternoon, saddle packs light, the wind cutting sharper than before. The neighbor, a slow-speaking man named Harlan, showed them his herd without fuss. Rowan asked questions about breeding and feed ratios, her voice steady. Wesley watched her more than the cattle. On the ride home, she shifted in the saddle. "You didn't say much back there." "I was listening. To me or to Harlan? Both." They crested a ridge just as the sun dipped below the line of the hills. The light caught her face, casting her in fire and gold. She looked over at him. "I want to try raising calves come spring," he nodded. "Then we will." At home, she wrote her uncle at last. She didn't show Wesley the letter, and he didn't ask. After she sealed it, she placed it on the mantel without a word. The snow came quiet, beginning as a hush in the air. Rowan woke to it first, lifting the curtain with a hand she hadn't realized was cold. The sky outside was thick and white, the world softened beneath it. By midday, the ground was covered. Wesley brought in the last of the dried beans from the shed, brushing snow from his shoulders as he stepped through the door. "You ever wintered in a place like this?" he asked, setting the sack down. Never stayed anywhere long enough, she said. He crossed the room, touching her wrist gently. You will now, she leaned into his touch. I know. That evening they cooked together, her at the stove, him slicing root vegetables by the window. The air inside was warm, the kind of warmth that sank into bone. She reached across the table for his hand as they ate, and he took it without hesitation. You ever think about what comes next? She asked him, voice low. He squeezed her fingers. Every day, she smiled. I'd like a second room. One with windows that face the pasture. I'll build it. And maybe a garden come spring with squash and beans, and that red lettuce you said won't grow out here. We'll try anyway. And children, his eyes met hers, steady as ever. If you want them, I do. Then we'll make room. The fire snapped behind them, soft and steady. Outside, the snow fell without sound, blanketing the world they were building, one word, one promise, one morning at a time. The snow held for 4 days before sunlight returned, sharp and white across the drifts. Wesley cleared a path to the barn with the flat of a shovel, boots sinking deep with every step. Rowan stood in the doorway, a wool shawl drawn close, watching him work without calling out. She'd begun to learn when to speak and when to leave the quiet alone. That evening, she trimmed back the wick in the oil lamp while Wesley laid out a set of iron hinges, newly acquired from a passing trade wagon. They'd exchanged 2 pounds of cured beef and a jar of her pickled onions for the hardware. The trader's accent had carried the edge of southern Illinois, and his mules were better fed than most. Rowan reached for the ledger, flipping to the last page. We'll need to stretch the flour until the next wagon through. Wesley didn't look up. I've still got cornmeal stashed in the loft, she nodded, noting it down. And the salt, half a sack left. She dipped the quill again, writing in small, neat letters. I want to try baking with lard instead of butter for the next batch. Wesley leaned back, rubbing his thumb along the edge of the table. You always plan 3 steps ahead, only when I'm building something worth keeping. He reached over and touched her wrist just once. You are. That night they lay beside each other beneath the heavy quilt, the window rattling faintly as the wind turned again. Rowan turned toward him, her breath warm against his collarbone. I've been thinking about the old shed by the creek, she whispered. It's too far gone to fix, but the stone foundation's solid, he murmured. What would you do with it? Smokehouse, maybe, or a place to hang herbs come spring. She pressed her cheek against his chest. I want every part of this place to be used. Nothing wasted. Wesley's hand moved slowly along her back. Then we'll make it so. The next morning they rode out to the creek bed, bundled in wool and leather. The snow crunched hard beneath the horses' hooves. The shed had collapsed inward, roof leaning against one wall like a man too tired to stand. Rowan dismounted first, crossing the short stretch of frozen earth to kneel by the stone base. There's good bone here, she said, brushing away snow with her gloves. Wesley stepped beside her, nodding. We'll have to clear it before the ground softens. She stood and looked up at him, eyes bright despite the cold. I can do that while you fence the south line. He studied her face for a moment. You're not afraid of the work. I'm afraid of wasting time. They rode back as the clouds gathered low, heavy with more snow. Rowan spent the rest of the day sorting the seed sacks in the storage corner, humming a tune he didn't recognize. Wesley listened from the table, carving a new handle for the drawknife. Her voice, quiet as it was, filled the room with something more lasting than warmth. That evening, as they shelled dried peas into a tin pan, Rowan asked, Did you have anyone before this? Before me, Wesley didn't answer right away. The peas made a dry sound as they hit the metal. Not like this, she didn't press. Me neither. Later, she wrapped her hands around a warm mug, watching the fire. I keep thinking about what kind of woman I used to be before I came here. I don't miss her. He sat beside her on the floor, legs stretched out. You don't have to be her anymore. I don't want to be. I'd rather be the kind of woman who knows how to set fence posts and bake without butter. You already are. The fire dimmed as the night deepened. Rowan rested her head on his shoulder and he leaned into her without a word. Outside, the wind dropped again. The stillness felt earned. The next day brought clear skies and snowlight so bright it turned the world to glass. Wesley saddled the mare early, heading out to check the south line fence. Rowan stayed behind, mending a tear in the back of his coat with small, careful stitches. At midday, she stepped outside to gather snow for boiling and saw a fox cross the field, tail high, passing without pause. She watched its path until it vanished beyond the ridge. When Wesley returned, he found the coat folded by the fire, patch neatly sewn. He touched the stitch line gently, then turned to where she stood near the stove, flour dusting her knuckles. "You didn't have to fix it." "I know." He crossed the room, took her hand, and brought it to his lips. "I'll wear it till it falls off me." She met his eyes, steady and sure. "That's the idea." That night they stood beneath the eaves as the moon rose full over the ridge. No words passed between them. The air smelled faintly of pine smoke and frost. Wesley took her hand in his, and they stood like that, side by side, the moonlight spilling silver across the snow-draped land that was theirs now, every inch of it, earned and shared. The thaw came slow and stubborn, like a mule that needed coaxing. Mud swallowed the yard in patches, and the sky stayed the color of tin for days on end. Rowan opened the windows anyway, letting the damp air carry through the cabin, though it clung to the walls like old worry. Wesley stood in the doorway, arms folded, watching her shake out the wool blankets. "You think spring's really coming?" he asked. She turned, face flushed from the effort. "It doesn't matter what I think, it always comes, whether we're ready or not." He stepped inside, letting the screen door click shut behind him. "I meant to ask. You ever do any planting?" "Only wildflowers," she said, folding the last blanket. "But I've been reading up on turnips. They don't need much coddling." Wesley ran a hand through his hair. "Turnips do fine in that rocky patch behind the barn. I've already cleared it." He blinked. "When?" "Last week, while you were mending the wagon." He looked at her for a long moment, then smiled. "You really don't sit still, do you?" "Not if I can help it." As the days warmed, they moved through the work without needing to speak much. Rowan dug trenches for seed potatoes with her boots caked in earth, her braid falling loose down her back. Wesley cut new rails for the pen, his hat low against the sun. They rested at midday beneath the cottonwoods, sharing bread and boiled eggs in the shade, the sun just beginning to carry heat again. One afternoon, as she scrubbed the last of the root cellar jars with a rag dipped in vinegar, Rowan glanced up at him from her spot on the stoop. "Did you ever see yourself settling down like this?" He poured a pail of water over his hands, watching the dirt run off. "I didn't think I was the kind of man who could." "You are." He glanced toward her, water dripping from his fingers. "Only because you're here." She stood, wiping her hands on her apron. "I think you would have found your way even without me." "No," he said, stepping closer. "No, I wouldn't have." The sound of the wind moving through the grass filled the silence between them. Then Rowan reached up, brushing a streak of dust from his cheek. "Then I'm glad I stayed." They married proper in early May. He rode into Rawlins with her, and they found a preacher who asked no questions about timing or history. Wesley bought her a second-hand ring from the general store, thin gold with a dent on one side. Rowan said it was perfect. The preacher's wife lent Rowan a clean shawl, and they stood in the small parlor with its faded curtains and wildflowers in a chipped pitcher on the table. The vows were brief, but the way Wesley held her hand made her feel steadier than she'd ever felt in her life. When they stepped outside, the sky was clear and the wind had softened. "You didn't have to do all this," she said, watching him tie the horses. "I wanted to," he replied. "You deserve it." Her uncle's letter arrived 2 weeks later, carried by a ranch hand passing through. Rowan read it by the fire, her expression unreadable. When she finished, she folded it once and set it in the box where she kept spare buttons and thread. "He's glad I found something good," she said, not looking up. Wesley nodded and didn't ask to see it. That summer they built the second room she'd mentioned. It took them most of June, with long days of sawing and hammering and evenings spent rubbing the aches from their shoulders. Rowan painted the window frames pale green. Wesley carved her name into the sill, small and clean. RGD. They planted beans and squash and even the red lettuce she doubted. By August, the garden was green and full, and Rowan stood barefoot among the rows, her hands stained from picking. They didn't speak often of the past. not because they were hiding from it, but because it no longer asked anything of them. The days were full with work and quiet joys, the kind that didn't need to be named to be known. One morning in September, Wesley found her out by the fence, her hand resting low over her belly. She turned when she heard him, a quiet, almost shy smile on her face. He didn't speak, just walked to her and laid his hand beside hers. "Yes?" he asked, voice low. "Yes," she said. He let out a breath, slow and deep. "You all right?" she nodded. "Just tired." He kissed the top of her hair and stood with her, both of them watching the horses sway in the field beyond. The wind tugged gently at the grass, and the sun warmed the earth beneath their boots. As autumn came, they prepared for winter again, but this time with extra blankets, more jars put up, and a crib Wesley built with care and quiet pride. Rowan sewed a quilt from scraps, every square a different piece of fabric from their shared days, a sleeve from his old shirt, the edge of the shawl she'd worn when he found her. They didn't need to say what they were making. The cabin held the answer in every corner. The child came in late February, just after a thaw. A girl, small and fierce-voiced, with Rowan's mouth and Wesley's eyes. They named her Eliza, after no one in particular, just a name that felt right when they said it aloud together. That first night, with the baby swaddled between them and the fire burning low, Rowan whispered, "Are you happy?" Wesley looked at her, at the curve of her shoulder, the rise and fall of the tiny bundle between them. "I didn't know I could be," he said. "Not like this." She reached for his hand beneath the blanket, their fingers lacing together without effort. The wind outside shifted, soft against the eaves. Inside, the air was warm, and the world they had made, planted, built, and chosen grew quiet around them, and stayed that way.